Hi, we're Amy and Nancy Harrington, and this is the Passionistas Project podcast. If you enjoy listening to the show, please consider becoming a patron. Just a small donation of $1 a month can help us keep the project going, and you'll get rewards like buttons, access to premium content, and invites to Passionistas Project events. Today we're talking to Laura Young, ballet dancer, teacher, and author of her new memoir, Boston Ballerina. Laura began dancing when she was just 6 years old and was invited to join the newly formed Boston Ballet at the age of 13. In 1965, she became a principal dancer for the company, where she spent most of the next 25 years. Her long and varied career included touring with Rudolph and Don Quixote. After hanging up her toe shoes, she began teaching and coaching for the Boston Ballet, where she's currently a senior faculty member. So please welcome to the show, Laura Young.
What a pleasure to be here with you.
What is the one thing you are most passionate about?
Learning. I am most passionate about learning. Learning for myself and learning for others. As an educator, I found a second career, and I found that I loved it just as much as the actual performing on the stage. Because in order to engage a classroom, you have to be a pretty good performer.
So tell us how you started dancing.
Oh, well, I was 6 years old and an extremely active young girl. And it was raining, and my mother said, because I was like going all over the house, "Would you like me to give you a ballet lesson, dear?" "Yeah." And she actually did start out, and I did do a little bit, and pretty soon she gave me some corrections, and I was not good with that. What do you know about it? Well, actually, my mother knew a great deal about it. She had studied when she was young and gone to New York City and studied with George Balanchine, the founder of New York City Ballet, right when he was starting his company. And he told her that if she would stay with him for a year, he'd put her in his brand new company. But my grandmother wouldn't let her stay. But you know what? If she'd let her stay, I wouldn't be here.
Did that decision influence you later on, that moment for her?
Well, I mean, she had all that knowledge herself, and she imparted it to me a little bit. And then when I gave her SAS, she sent me to a real ballet teacher, who was someone that she had studied with, and whose cousin was the co-founder with Virginia Williams of the Boston Ballet. That was Sidney Leonard. So it was all happenstance, but very fortunate happenstance.
Is there a moment when you thought, I want to do this as my career? Do you remember that, the kind of exact moment when you realized this was your calling?
I would say probably 13, right after I quit. I quit for about 6 months because I was convinced that I didn't have the goods, because I was third cast in a ballet that was a Mr. Balanchine ballet, and everybody else was in the first and second cast. And that was 16 dancers, and there were 2 of us in the third cast. And I said, oh, geez, maybe this isn't the right thing for me. So I quit. And then I found out that there was a huge hole in my existence. And I went back. And fortunately, Virginia Williams was an astute mentor. She sent me a handwritten letter saying, "I think you can do this." I did.
Talk a little bit about Virginia and what she taught you and what she meant to you.
She was like an artistic, motherly figure to me. I mean, I was 12 years old when I started studying with her. She had just formed New England Civic Ballet, which is the amateur company. You don't get paid, you pay them. And at 16, that was when we got the Ford Foundation grant. And Virginia initially turned it down because she said, "I don't think that we can raise the matching funds, and I don't want it to fall by the wayside." But people persisted, and she said, "Okay, we'll do it." And we did do the matching funds. Her stick-to-itiveness, her ability to push all of us towards a goal that she really had her sights were not set on being a professional dancer. Her sights were set on creating a company where all the dancers that she had promoted and created had a place to dance in the city of Boston.
Was there a core message that you learned from her?
Learn everything. In ballet, you are usually cast in 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 or 4 ballets. Hopefully not, because you're pretty pooped at the end of the evening. But if there's something that you desire to dance and you're not cast in it, it's up to you to get yourself in the room and learn it. Because inevitably somebody is going to get injured, and she who knows the role will go in. It served me well over the years.
And what about your mother? What lessons did you learn from her about, not necessarily even ballet, but just about women's roles in society and life lessons?
My mother was a chemist initially. She worked at Procter & Gamble until she got pregnant with my brother, and all the chemical smells started making her sick, so she had to leave. But she was very interested. She was also an X-ray technician. She did what she needed to do in order to raise her family. And what she decided to do, she did, period. And that I took with me. You know, if you want to do it, invest yourself in it and go for the whole thing.
That must have helped you as you made your way through the company. Talk about that journey to becoming a principal dancer.
There were very few of us in those days, comparatively to today. It's a much more competitive edge now because so many more people are informed about it, have come to love it, and little girls have seen the Nutcracker over and over and over again, and they want to be the Sugar Plum Fairy. So they go take their ballet lessons, and it either grabs them or it doesn't, but there are so many more now, it's much more difficult to get a job. It would be difficult for me to get a job today. I don't have the ideal body. Pirouettes were not my favorite thing to do, and there are many. But consequently, I became a very good teacher of pirouettes because I had to learn what worked.
So one of the things that struck us reading the book was the camaraderie between the dancers. It seems like from the book that you were all very supportive of one another. So talk a little bit about that relationship you had with those women.
Elaine Bauer and Anna Marie Sarrazin and myself were the three main ballerinas for a good chunk of time there. There were others that came in and left, and we've all remained good friends to this day. Because we were so few, and we were all committed to the prospect of making sure that the company survived so that we would have a place to dance. So it was very much a team effort. We liked to share roles, actually, because we would be able to help each other and borrow from each other. Because, emotionally you might do something in a rehearsal and it becomes a very honest movement. And when you see that, you know that that's the way it should be done. So we'd go to each other. I like the way you did that. Can I do that too? Because we knew that it would be different simply because of our individual approaches. But the honest moment is really important.
As a dancer, do you take those lessons and live those off of the stage or outside of the dance studio?
Absolutely. I teach my kids that focus of the eyes is probably the most important thing they can learn, because at the end of a ballet class, you do what's called a reverence. And it's to the teacher and it's to the pianist, so that you thank them for teaching you and you thank them for playing music for you to dance to. And in the reverence, if you don't look at the person that you're thanking, they don't get it. And it's the same thing with your audience. And when you're looking out at the audience, if you just look at the audience and have a 40-foot stare in a 10-foot room, nobody gets it. But if you see each and every sector of the theater, every single person in that theater thinks you're looking at them. And it makes it personal and it makes it emotional.
Describe a typical day when you were a dancer.
Fortunately for me, morning class would start at 10 a.m., so you could miss the traffic. And you'd start with an hour-and-a-half class and have up to 6 to 8 hours of rehearsal following that. And if you're in point shoes for 8 hours a day, your feet get tiny. When I retired from the stage, I went up a full shoe size. Take a look at point shoes on a ballerina's foot. They have to fit really snugly so that your foot doesn't slide inside the shoe at all, because you'll wind up with blisters, and it has to be like a glove. So when you're in it all day long like that, I went from a size 6 to a size 7. But once you get used to them, I was more comfortable in point shoes than I was barefoot, because that was normal.
How did you get through days that were just exhausting or you were hurt? How did you push yourself?
Passion. It's passion. It's the thing that drives you to overcome physical adversity, mental adversity, You know that to do it, you have to, you have to invest yourself completely.
Describe a typical day for you now as an instructor.
Teaching is a very different proposition. As a dancer, I would get up in the morning, I would take a whirlpool bath to try and get my calves down somewhere around the lower part of my leg. Use all kinds of Myoflex or Bengay or Tiger Balm, or any of those things on your muscles before you get into your tights and dress up. And then you do your class, and then you have a 5-minute break until rehearsal. And you have a 5-minute break every hour. After 3 or 4 hours, there would be a lunch break, and then you'd go back for another 3 or 4 hours. For teaching, I don't have to do any of that. Because mainly I teach the older students, the ones who are more advanced. I'm utilized as a senior faculty member, meaning, number one, I'm older, and number two, I have the variations and repertory at my disposal to teach to the older students. And it's not necessary for me to demonstrate anymore with them. They know the vocabulary, and they can watch my hands. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and they know what I'm doing.
So when you were dancing, was there something that you considered the most important part of your daily routine?
Ballet class. You need to take your class in the morning. It's not only to get warmed up and prepared for the rehearsals, but it's also to further your technique, because that's the time when you can refine things that you know you have trouble with.
How do you deal with creative block?
Creative block. Well, as a dancer, I never really had it. As a choreographer, I've had plenty of mental blocks. That's the creative process. As a dancer, you are given the vocabulary and the structure that you have to use. As far as the emotional content, that comes from your inner being, and you can tell right away. And that's why I tell my kids it's really important to do the emotional response in rehearsals in the studio, where you feel like an absolute fruitcake because it's so close and you're looking in a mirror. Because if you do something in the studio, and you'll know immediately if it's false, if it doesn't ring true, and you won't do it again. But if you wait until you get on the stage, you're stuck with egg on your face. So work it all out in the studio ahead of time.
We're Amy and Nancy Harrington, and you're listening to the Passionistas Project podcast and our interview with Laura Young. Read Laura's life story in her autobiography, Boston Ballerina, now available on Amazon. Now here's more of our conversation with Laura. What's one lesson that you learned from being a dancer that has stuck with you through your life?
Be goal-oriented. What you place in front of yourself to do, look at it, analyze it, and go for it. And if it's not the right thing, drop it like a hot potato.
When you look back at your career, is there a moment where you think you were most courageous, and by making that courageous choice, it propelled your career forward?
Probably Dancing with Rudolph Nureyev. Dancing with Rudolph was, number one, an overwhelming, nervous, not knowing what to expect, oh my God, I'm dancing with a legend experience. I did not dance with him in any of the rehearsals when we went to London for Swan Lake. That was the first time I'd ever danced with him. He was rehearsing with my alternate, Marie-Christine Muis, who was 5'7", and he was 5'9". So on point, she was a little too tall for him. So he wanted to make sure that everything was right for opening night. I was not slated for opening night. So we get to the dress rehearsal, and the director came up to me and said, you're going to do the dress rehearsal with Rudolph today. Never having, not one pirouette, not anything. And I my knees knocked together. And I asked, I went to Rudolph and I said, please, could we just do the one pirouette in the third act pas de deux? And it's a particular turn where the guy's hand is over your head and you're holding on to 2 fingers, and that's the means of support. You're turning. And then your leg whips out and goes behind you in what's called an arabesque, and he steps back to let your leg pass between you. You can imagine what might be in the way. Not wanting to ruin the man's temperament, I asked him if we could do that pirouette before we went out. We did it fine. We went out, we did the entire third act pas de deux without a stop after never having rehearsed together. And the company stopped the dress rehearsal with applause. And that was affirmation from my peers, from Rudolph, because he was like, and for myself, my own very need to reaffirm that I had chosen the right career.
What do you think was your biggest professional challenge as a dancer, and how did you overcome it?
Like I said, my biggest challenge was pirouettes. They never came naturally to me. There was a lovely young lady who joined the company just as I was retiring, and she stepped in for me when I got injured on opening night, Jennifer Gelfand. And I swear to God, she had a little internal gyroscope implanted in her, because you could watch her do pirouettes, and her body would just do this little undulation thing, and she'd be back on it, she'd go around for 6 more turns. I've seen her do like 12 or 14, on point, and it's absolutely mind-boggling. I did have to learn how to pirouette, and Virginia tried all these weird combinations of things that never worked. One of my partners finally became the real person who taught me what had to happen, and it came down to absolute coordination. Because if anything, in a pirouette, if anything is slightly mistimed, it's a force that acts upon the pirouette and takes you off your balance. With that lodging in my brain, then I was able to work at it that way, and I was eventually able to do many pirouettes, many more with a partner than by myself, however.
What was your signature move?
I was known for jumping. I was a good jumper, and balance, which came about later when I finally understood the plumb line.
What's that?
You know when plumbers drop a plumb, yeah, it goes right through the center of your body, and everything has to be tight around it.
What do you think is the most rewarding part of being a dancer?
As a dancer, the most exhilarating thing is knowing that you've come through with true emotion and good technical expertise. There's always the performance where you bobble and you say, oh, well, that was terrible. That will never float. And everyone else looks at it and says, oh, that was nothing. The rest of the performance was great because you were so concerned with the bobble that it impacted your performance and often wasn't seen at all. But when you absolutely connect with the audience, especially in the classics, things like Romeo and Juliet, Swan Lake, when you hear the pin drop and your own heartbeat before the applause starts, you know you've gotten them. You've made a connection.
And what about as a teacher, what's been the most rewarding thing?
When you see the light bulb go off over their heads and all of a sudden they go, oh, that's the end all and be all. I love it when all of a sudden they pirouette. It reminds me of when I found it.
Is there something you know now that you wish you knew when you started out?
No, it was just, I mean, maybe if I knew I was going to have 2 replaced hips and a bad ankle and all of that, I might have done things differently. But in the heat of the moment and the passion of the moment, you're going to go for whatever it takes to get you there. I mean, I danced with a stress-fractured femur twice. Yeah, I came back too soon and refractured it, dancing Swan Lake. I might do that differently today, but I had to be there. My partner was retiring. I had to be there for him.
Did you do that a lot as a dancer? Did you put kind of the other person before your own interests?
Well, that wasn't necessarily before my own interest because I wanted one last time to dance Swan Lake with him. We had a very simpatico relationship. Don Edwards and I didn't have a long tenure together, but we danced many different ballets during that time. And what always came across was the simplicity of the lines. He was always in the same line that I would be in, so you would see everything come together into one picture.
What do you think is your proudest career achievement?
That I lasted 50 years in it. My passion started when I was 8 years old for the ballet, when I found my mother's old point shoes in my grandmother's attic. They didn't know I found them. I wore out both pairs by stuffing socks in the toes until my mother found them and said, "What's this?" And she took me and her point shoes to my ballet teacher and said, she's been on point for, I think, 2 years. And they figured maybe they'd better teach me how to do it. We don't even put kids on point until 11 or 12 now because the bones are soft. I'm fortunate that I didn't hurt my feet.
So what advice would you give to a young woman that wants to become a professional dancer?
Don't count on it. Put everything you have into it. If you decide that you want to be a dancer, your class time will increase commensurately with your ability. And inevitably, as a teenager, like when I quit, it was like, I want to be a teenager. I want to see my friends. But you have to do the work. If you don't do the work, you will not get there. And that means being in class every day. Because in 3 days' time, you lose what you have put into your body. Your body loses in 3 days. We never used to like to take 3 days off in a row. And especially before performance week, we didn't want 2 days off before. 1 day, so that you can pull your muscles back to where they need to be to do the performances.
What's your definition of success?
Being happy with what you've chosen to do, doing it well, and continuing to learn to make it better.
Do you have a secret to a rewarding life?
Laugh a lot and live it by your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, but really laugh a lot. It makes everything better. It gives you breath. It gives you light in your eyes, and it makes other people around you happier.
Besides your mother and Virginia, did you have any other influential female role models as you were growing up?
There were dancer role models for sure. Margot Fonteyn from the Royal Ballet. Actually, when I saw her dance, it was the Sadler's Wells. And she was the one that Rudolph Nureyev partnered with when he first defected from Russia. And I actually got to dance with Margot Fonteyn opposite her in Les Sylphides. So she was the quintessential ballerina, modest, unassuming, helpful, and passionate. Her dancing was always exquisite. She never had a huge extension, meaning the legs very high, but the lines that she created with the leg lower were so sublime that it was art. That's the thing I took from her. Make art.
Thanks for listening to the Passionistas Project podcast and our interview with Laura Young. Read Laura's life story in her autobiography, Boston Ballerina, now available on Amazon. And be sure to subscribe to the Passionistas Project podcast so you don't miss any of our upcoming inspiring guests.